Thank you, Ariel, for briefly introducing what, how, and for whom, WHW, Curatorial Collective, and also thanks to Fundació, Antoni, Tàpies for inviting us. We are happy to be here at this conference and to share with you some of the topics we have been researching in our work in the last 15 years that touch upon the focus of this seminar. I must say in the beginning that although the name of our collective is in English, what, how, and for whom, as in abbreviated form, we don't pronounce it as WHW, but in a kind of a hybrid in Croatian way as WHW. So when I say WHW, I mean the name of our collective. So, the framework of our collective work has been constantly changing and transforming since the late 90s when we started to work. So it started from the informal and self-organized work to complex partnership and running a city-owned Gallery Nova in Zagreb. Today I will be talking about several of WHW's exhibitions and projects we've been involved with that from a non-academic position reactualize the status of socialist modernism. Apart from that, I will also reflect on artistic practice of David Maljković. His series of collages and videos called Scene for a New Heritage from 2002 is an early example of the reactualization of the artistic heritage from socialism that during the 90s in Croatia, due to the very nationalistic climate, was either ideologically suppressed or violently destroyed, as in the case of the many monuments of socialist Yugoslavia. So, in the last 15 years, the heritage of socialist modernism, along with conceptual art from former Yugoslavia, has passed a long way, from historical amnesia to a sought-after currency. So, we have been witnessing in last years a flood of its resurrection, featured at various international exhibitions, artistic and academic projects, on the market and in the art collections. The questions of history dominated these processes in the local and international context. In Croatia, still unresolved attitude to history remains closely interwoven with the problematic attitude toward communism that has been recently aggravated with the far-right revisionist vigour of the new government we got a few months ago. One could, when looking at this image, one can maybe conclude that the image dates from the Croatian 90s, but the situation is that this graffiti that says "Back to the communism" actually appeared just a few weeks ago in the city of Zagreb. The so-called historiographic turn in contemporary art, curator Dieter Rollstrete analyzed in his well-known text, The Way of the Shovel, on the archaeological imaginary in art from 2009. So the obsession with investigating the past that at some point prevailed in artistic production obviously had to do with arts and our collective inadequacy to look at the present and to understand it. If art in that way demonstrated the crisis of the history, we are experiencing it in various geopolitical contexts, but it also pointed out toward the fundamental lack of imagination, also to understand future or to try to invent it. So we can say that instead of that, the process of forgetting became a central point of contemporary condition. When talking about curatorial and artistic investigations of the topics of socialist modernism, we always stress that our attempts did not approach this heritage from an academic, historical, nor strictly theoretical perspective. Instead, we tried to reactualize it in the present moment and propose ways for its more politicized readings. This is why we are in favor of the term socialist modernism, because it points toward the fact that its production was a part of a broader socialist project, not necessarily a top-down production, but also that resulted in various complex situations imbued with contradictions and specificities, and that also canceled this false dualism between engaged and autonomous art. Being in favor of this term has nothing to do with understanding that modernist practice from Yugoslavia was intrinsically socialist, but it acknowledges its social and political dimension. It's also important to stress that in some cases, the involvement with ideas of socialism in art field were far more progressive than it was the case with the bureaucratic apparatus in power. In his text, We and the Others, Russian curator Viktor Misiano stressed the importance to claim the legacy of the socialist modernism, not in a way that it does belong to another, so-called another modernization, but the modernization in the East was an integral part of the modernization per se. So, our position was not to reconcile the contrasted views in modernism, but to understand them within the dynamics of their relations, to see contradictions as inherent to modernism itself, and to explore their specifics and characteristic in a given cultural space. The understanding behind using the term socialist modernism, it also points toward the fact that modernism per se was not a monolith construction, nor that it was an ideologically empty. As many of the examples I will present today, the notions of artistic freedom and autonomy of art are only seemingly disconnected from ideology and politics. So, since the very beginning of our work, the notion of history played an important role, although it was not exclusively related to the socialist modernism. I will start with presenting our first exhibition, titled What, How, and For Whom, on the occasion on 152nd anniversary of Communist Manifesto, that happened in 2000 in Zagreb and in a modified version in 2001 in Vienna. Here you can see the invitation card from the exhibition in Vienna. So this exhibition in many ways was symptomatic for the development of our collective way of working that is continually articulating sensitive social issues, and they are also inevitably related to history. Also, the first exhibition affirmed a method of using the medium of the exhibition to intervene in existing social, institutional, and ideological landscapes. The three questions, what, how, and for whom, from the name of our collective and from the title of our first exhibition, are actually three basic questions of every economic organization. So, what do you produce? How do you do it? And for whom is it for? And these questions became the motto of our curatorial work, and later on we took it as a name of our collective. And when we work on a certain project, we always ask ourselves these questions, and they are, in that way, a constant source of inspiration. In the 2000s, when the exhibition was done, it was the time when the grip of the right-wing and heavily nationalistic politics, characteristic of Croatian 90s, marked by the war from 1991 to 1995, finally started to lose its grip. At that time, a cultural landscape in Croatia was characterized by the bureaucratic sluggishness, and we were stuck in the confusion of so-called transition. With its rediscovery of capitalism, crumbling social infrastructure, quest for the holy grail of national identity, and of course, complete suppression of socialist history. After a period of post-war normalization, this nationalism and historical revisionism are again resurrected today by the current right-wing, basically post-fascist hegemony in Croatia. While working on our first exhibition, we were interested to find out what Communist Manifesto, so once very dangerous book, now turned into almost forgotten and harmless souvenir, might mean today, both as a political concept and as a philosophical text. So the exhibition questioned a wide range of social issues, mostly being focused on the complex relationship between art and economy. In regard to the local context, a special emphasis was on, as I mentioned, the unresolved relations toward the legacy of socialist decades and economic transition. So, after a long time, that was the first big international exhibition in Croatia. It included around 50 artists and other participants, and we combined two generations of Croatian artists, one that started to work in late 60s and 70s, and that belonged to this, say, conceptual line of new artistic practice, with the work of then younger generation. Also, it's important to mention that in this exhibition in 2000, after the war, it was for the first time that artists from ex-Yugoslavia and from Serbia as well were exhibiting in Zagreb again. Basically, our idea was to show the existing works by the international artists, and at the same time to invite local artists to produce new works that are kind of reflecting the existing context that was marked by devastated economy, extremely high rate of unemployment, and the pauperization. One of the works we produced was work by feminist artist, Croatian feminist artist Sanja Iveković, who is one of the rare artists who worked a lot on collective amnesia and the erasure of anti-fascist Croatian past during the 90s. Here you can see her project, Gene XX, that was originally published in late 90s in a small circulation Croatian magazines. Sanja appropriated magazine ads that are featuring professional models, and here you can see this model being renamed as Nada Dimić, and there are some other female activists who were during the World War II, who were part of the resistance and who were imprisoned, tortured, and executed by Quisling Ustaša regime in Croatia in World War II. So by using these attractive advertising images, Sanja reintroduced their histories into the conscience of, at the time, amnesiac society. The series of works we initiated for the exhibition was first part of the longer project she did later on called Nada Dimić File. So Nada Dimić was a people's heroine, a real person who was executed in the World War II by Ustaše. And she was only, as it says here, at the time of her death, only 19 years old. Nada Dimić was also a name of the textile factory, which traditionally employed mostly women. Through the socialist decades, the factory had been successfully functioning under the name Nada Dimić, and then in the 90s, in the privatization process, it attempted to rebrand itself with a new international name, Andy International. Here you can see the logo. So for the exhibition, Sanja renovated and relighted the neon sign at the factory. This is how it looked before the exhibition, and for the exhibition we renovated this neon sign, and in that way Sanja symbolically linked the factory's name to the real person, national heroine, and also she drew the attention to the fate of the workers of the factory that at the time of the exhibition was bankrupt. And as I said, it was a first work in her long-term series, Not an Image File, that researched both the fate of the national heroine and the factory workers. And this is actually all what is left of the original building, because it was a very beautiful example of industrial architecture. And it was just one of the many cases of privatization in Croatia, when factories and other assets that were previously owned by state or socially owned were on purpose ruined, sold for nothing, just to be handled to the private hands. So since the very beginning, the heritage of 70s played a prominent role in our curatorial work. Due to the insufficient engagement of central cultural institutions in last 2 decades or in last 15 years, the reception of that heritage was made very difficult for our generation, who started to work in the late 90s, because it was simply largely inaccessible. But on the other hand, the institutional void enabled us new interpretations and sort of a mental freedom to claim this heritage and to access it with new meanings. So the right to claim that legacy, to reactualize it and to influence its readings was a crucial challenge. It's important to mention that the first impulses for these new readings of the past were not coming from the direction of the central cultural institutions, but from the various artistic investigations and also independent curatorial projects, like from smaller organizations, independent collectives, and some other sources. The project I will present briefly now is called Political Practices in Post-Yugoslav Art. And in 2009 in Belgrade, the exhibition called Political Practices in Post-Yugoslav Art, Retrospective 1, was presented. And the exhibition summarized many of those parallel independent investigations. At that time, so that was 9 years after our first exhibition, we were already in this post-normalized period in ex-Yugoslavia. And I must say that this exhibition, it was initiated by 4 organizations: Prelom Collective from Belgrade, Kuda.org from Novi Sad, Proba and SSEA from Sarajevo, and us, WHW. The exhibition was presented at the Museum of Yugoslav History, this building you can see here. And since the exhibition has a very long title, The Political Practices of Post-Yugoslav Art, Retrospective 1, from now on I will refer to it in a shorter version as PPU Art. The exhibition was curated and initiated by Belgrade-based curator Jelena Vesić, who was at the time a member of Prelom Collective, and she invited a group of independent collectives, theorists, researchers, artists and activists from former Yugoslavia, but also some of the international artists like Hito Sterl or Russian group What's to be Done, who were in their work referring to the heritage of socialist Yugoslavia. So the exhibition encompassed a number of political phenomena, movements, critical terms and aesthetic concepts, the activities of individual artists, different kind of experiments in the field of exhibitions, but also in the field of alternative institutional practice. What's important to mention is that in parallel to that, because it was collectively done, the retrospective also proposed a sort of open collective form. So it was not this way of just presenting one narrative. So the exhibition had many chapters, 9 chapters, and several artistic projects that been included in it. And so the point of research was artistic practices developed in socialist Yugoslavia, and they were divided in 3 chapters. So the first chapter was partisan art, the second one was socialist modernism, and the third one was new artistic practice. So 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the exhibition offered lots of concrete examples, and in that way it's important to stress that all those researchers, although they did not offer a kind of objective and complete knowledge about the practice from that period, it was indeed a pioneer research at the time. I'll start with briefly presenting several chapters. How to Think Partisan Art was a project initiated by theorists and artists from Slovenia, Miklaus Komelj, Lidija Radojević, Tanja Velagić, and Jože Barši, that started in 2008 and that investigated art between 1941 and 1945 in Slovenia, when, during the revolutionary anti-fascist struggle of the Yugoslav nations, parallel to that, a process of new revolutionary subjectivity also established a new coordinates for viewing and understanding the art. This example was quite important, and while we were doing the exhibition called Really Useful Knowledge, presented at Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid in 2014, we presented part of the research done related to partisan art production in Slovenia, and we positioned it in the same room where numerous posters and graphics by Minister of Culture of Red Panthers, Emory Douglas, were presented, so in that way to link those two very strong revolutionary subjectivities that also had an asset in artistic production. Another example, as soon as I open my eyes, I see a film that was curated by Anna Janevski, and that presented amateur cinema clubs from Zagreb, Belgrade, and Split, and also it researched this connection between experimenting in the so-called amateur cinematic art and also in the field of art in 50s and 60s. TV Gallery, the continuous art class, was a project by Kuda.org from Novi Sad that presented a phenomenon of TV gallery that was initiated by curator Dunja Blažević, that in the television media advocated the ideas of democratization of contemporary art, and that also produced lots of video works that were presented in the broadcast. Another example removed from the crowd, research by Ivana Bago and Antonija Majača from Delv Collective. It was a research project that considered the phenomenon of new artistic practice in Croatia in late 60s and the 70s, that was concerned with the dematerialization of the art object and also with this idea of democratization of art. This is the case of Student Cultural Center in the 70s, curated by Prelom Collective, that researched the institutional landscape of student cultural centers in Belgrade and also in other parts of Yugoslavia that during the 90s were a seminal example of self-organized artistic and curatorial practice. So apart from that, Exhibition also encompassed a number of individual artworks like David Maljković or Croatian artist Igor Grubić, Hito Štarl, and many others who in their work thematized the heritage of socialist Yugoslavia. The aim of the PPU art exhibition was first of all self-educational. So in a sense that for us it was important to share all these parallel researches and to kind of place them in one place. And later on we also edited a reader. And in the reader also like 2 points were highlighted. There were, although many of those exhibition chapters were done individually by different collectives and individuals, there were like 2 main starting points that we shared. And the first one was against the interpretation of the art from socialist Yugoslavia, understood as dissident art from Eastern Europe. So this understanding established a narrative of brave artists whose individual voices in the midst of totalitarian communist system rebelled for the right to the freedom of expression. So we rather claimed something else, that they were part of the cultural policies of the time, even when those practices and examples were rather critical of it. Another point that also was mentioned yesterday and today had to do with opposing this idea of so-called Yugo nostalgia. Since at that time already this romantic idea and the call for the return to so-called gold old times of Yugoslavia started to appear, and we were very critical about it, and the idea was to claim what this practice might mean today for us, and in that sense the exhibition as a whole can be seen also as a need and as a statement that what we really need was a sober analysis of the production and political project of socialist Yugoslavia with all its advantages, experiments, but also failures and limitations. So now I will present 2 chapters that we curated. The first chapter is, as you can see here, didactic exhibition on abstract art, an experimental exhibition from 1957. Ljiljana Kolesnik was talking about it yesterday a bit more in details. And finally, we have this exhibition being presented in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb. And it is actually for the first time that many of us who were researching, admiring this project were able to see it in person and in real. So what we did, in the spirit of the original exhibition that used copies, we designed wall panels by using cuts from the catalog, and we made a reinterpretation of the original panels, although we never saw them. And a member of Exat 51, Ivan Pitzelj, was helping us, and he borrowed us his catalog, and our colleague Dejan Kršić, who is also designing all of our publications, then made a visual representation, a visual reinterpretation of the panels. So after many years, this presentation brought attention to this exhibition that in the local milieu always had this kind of mythical status. So everyone knew about it, but actually very few had some concrete knowledge about it. And even today, didactic exhibition still stands as a unique example of experimental form in the history of exhibiting. We can even look at it as an example of proto-conceptual way of showing documents, and also it's important to say that the exhibition mostly consisted of copies, and it was also signed as a collective work. And just to demonstrate to what extent this exhibition influenced lots of rumors in the local scene, there is another example of a revolutionary exhibition from 1968 called the Exhibition of Women and Men, that was produced and introduced in the Zagreb Student Center and curated by Želimir Koščević, who was at the time curating and running this gallery. So this exhibition, the exhibition on women and men, actually consisted just of audience. So it was a very radical example of the materialization of artistic form. And the only thing audience was presented with was a text written by several people behind this exhibition. And it's interesting that in the subtitle, the exhibition of women and men, it has also subtitle saying didactic exhibition. So in that sense, we can trace that this exhibition from '57 also influenced cultural production in the previous decades. Didactic exhibition, we presented it also in the exhibition called Art Always Has Its Consequences. Here is the catalog if someone is interested to take a look at it. And this was another collaborative project in which Transit HU from Budapest, Museum Štuki from Łódź from Poland, and Kuda.org from Novi Sad and WHW took part. We dealt with a number of topics, mostly related to the history of exhibitions, especially so-called invisible history of exhibition in Eastern Europe, and production of artist texts and conceptual design. Here you can see didactic exhibition being presented at the exhibition Art Always Has Its Consequences in 2010, and the exhibition took place at Kulmer Palace on Katarinski Square in Zagreb, which is actually the location that for many years served as a venue for Gallery of Contemporary Art, later renamed to the Museum of Contemporary Art. So the exhibition confronted contemporary production with various examples from the past, and also it called for responsibility of the art institutions, and it was really inscribed in this ideological memory of the space. So we didn't, here you can see my colleague Sabina Sabolović and Ivan Picelj at the opening. So in that sense, the exhibition was invested with confronting and showing various layers. We didn't paint the space in white, we rather use it as it was at that time. This is a work by Croatian artist Vlado Martek that says museums are sad. So we also included lots of contemporary works that question the role of museum in our societies. This is example by Guerrilla Art Action Group from 60s from New York, and we also used a former storage of the museum. It's a very small room, and we presented there a film by Hungarian artist Tamás Szentjoby, Kentaur, from late 60s. This is a work by Miklos Erdélyi, Solidarity Action, from the late 60s, and now we are slowly approaching the second chapter in the PPU art exhibition that was dedicated to Vojin Bakić. This is how it looked in the museum in Belgrade. We included some Bakić sculptures that were in the collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade. And this exhibition in PPU Art, it was an aftermath of the exhibition we did in 2007 in Gallery Nova. And it was our first exhibition on Vojin Bakić, and later on in 2008 we made one presentation in Kunstverein in Graz. So with Vojin Bakić exhibition, it was for the first time that we intervened in the highly restricted and institutionally guarded area of high modernism. The Vojin Bakić exhibition at the Gallery Nova in 2007 was actually the artist's first solo show after 41 years. So, who is Vojin Bakić? Vojin Bakić is a modernist sculptor who, on one hand, has been perceived as an authentic modernist sculptor, the main figure of the breakup, one of the main figures of the breakup with socialism, and proponent of abstraction who forged the path for freedom of artistic expression in the 50s. And on the other hand, he is being perceived as a state artist whose art has been servicing ideology. Here you can see a model for his proposal to the monument of Marx and Engels that meant to be presented in Belgrade. There was a huge scandal related to that contest, and it was just a few years before the didactic exhibition happened. And as Ljiljana said yesterday, in 1957 with didactic exhibition, all those fierce ideological battles over abstraction were already over. And at the time, in the early 50s, when Bakić did his proposal that meant to celebrate the fathers of Marxism, his proposal was attacked and somehow also pronounced Western because of this very gentle leaning toward the Cubist usage of presentation. And we can say that local and international reception of Bakić's work in last decades, we have these periods of intense interpretation, of intense critical valorization and presence, and then sudden breaks and silences. And after exhibiting in Venice Biennial in '56, World Expo in Brussels, 58, Gallery Denise René in Paris, 59, Documenta again, 59. In the 60s, Bakić's work was at the peak of his valorization in art history, not only locally but also internationally. He met with Henry Moore. He was part of this very famous C4 anthology on modernist sculpture. So on the other hand, in the last decades, his work, especially his monuments that commemorated anti-fascist struggle, oscillated between material devastation and also intellectual marginalization. He is highly acclaimed in official art histories, yet his monuments erected to the honor of anti-fascist struggle have been devastated in the heat of nationalism in the early 90s. So in the 90s, a new political imaginary was established, and it included more or less violent removal of monuments from the socialist past. They say that there is around 3,000 monuments and memorials being removed or destroyed or defaced from that part, but the most tragic destiny happened to his magnificent monument of people's victory in Kamenska. It was inaugurated in the late 60s, and at that time it was the biggest abstract sculpture in the world, and this is actually what's left of it. And it was destroyed in the 90s, and there are some indications that even a Croatian army was involved with this act, because it was such a big and powerful sculpture, and lots of scientists and experts were invested their knowledge for almost 10 years to make it stable. So the exhibition we did in Gallery Nova, the point was that we highlight two things. One is this objective state of that heritage, and another one, a frustration. And we can say that from 2007 till nowadays, many things happened. Of course, after maybe 6 or 7 years, institutions like official museums also started to pay attention to that heritage, also related maybe to this international re-evaluation of it. But in 2007, it was really a pioneer act to show Bakić sculptures. And I said that the exhibition was in many ways influenced and inspired by artist David Maljković, who, while exhibiting in some international biennials and other exhibitions, often along with his own works, also presented Bakić sculptures. So, the exhibition was not really accessible for the visitors, and the sculptures could be seen only through gallery windows. And twice a week we opened a gallery space, and we invited theorists, artists, curators, friends of Bojan Bakić to make a guide through the exhibition, to make a guide tour through the exhibition, and also in a way to reactualize its heritage in this form. The artworks were presented on one pedestal, on one improvised pedestal that continued through the gallery. And this was not a kind of a curatorial joke or conceptual pun, as it might seem, but while preparing the exhibition, in the midst of it, at some point we realized that our very modest gallery infrastructure and very limited budget is not at all appropriate for presenting the sculptures, also because of the security reasons, but also because of our basic incompetence to categorize and make a valid chronological order of the works. So instead, this exhibition was done in collaboration with artist's granddaughter, Ana Martina Bakić, and it was a process of a long discussions with her. And at some point, we opted for this version. So closed space, things can be only seen from the outside, and twice a week guided tours. And this very form also highlighted the status that this heritage at that time occupied, in a way like, okay, it is here, but you cannot really access it. There is this, a barrier. And also, while writing about the exhibition, we found a very nice metaphor of the original meaning of the word problematizing. So basically, problematizing, when you look at the Greek origins of the word, it means to throw something in front of someone. So in that sense, that also served as a metaphor for the whole situation. But apart from the gallery space, there is also adjacent space that we used for lectures and discursive program. And this part of the exhibition was opened all the time, again in collaboration with our colleague Dejan Kršić. We designed a timeline that followed Bakić's works through various decades, and that also marked these ruptures into continuity. And then when we presented our research on Vojin Bakić within PPU Art exhibition, we combined both this archival part and the sculptures themselves. And now I will briefly recall some of the works by Croatian artist David Maljković, whose numerous series of collages and videos referring to socialist modernism managed to escape a seductive call for its fetishization. And we can say that David's works still stand as a telling metaphors of the contradictory state that this heritage occupies. So, searching for possible echoes of the progressive ideas from the past, Maljković opened this cracked, invisible space and gradually opened it toward various parallel interpretations. I think that's very important, that the first impulse for revisiting this heritage was not coming either from curators nor from the institutions, but that it came through the artistic impulse. And his works in that sense also evoked modernism as an unfinished project, and they diagnosed the impossibility to reconstruct it in the present time. I will briefly present few stills from his trilogy called Scene for New Heritage from 2002, and from 2002 to 2006 he did 3 videos and numerous collages that are all investigating a possible usage in future of the Vojin Bakić's monument on Petrova Gora. This is how the monument looked like in 2007, and this is not even the recent photo. It was photographed maybe 4 years ago, so just that you can see this rapid devastation. So it's one of the rare monuments that was not physically destroyed in the 90s. It somehow survived them. But due to the neglect, and they say that people in that area are using these aluminium platters for, various reusages, and it's also incredible that on the top of it, repetitors of Croatian national television were positioned. So it also tells a lot about this paradoxical status of the heritage of socialist modernism, that we can say still is floating in a way that it's still undecided. What David did, he did 3 videos, and the setting for the films is the monument, and in each of these stories they are all situated in the imaginary future. 3 groups of visitors are revisiting this monument, and the idea was to ask the question: what happens with the form that was previously inhabited by different ideological ideas when those ideas do not live any longer? So what happens with the form? And David imbued this question with various, sometimes ironical, sometimes funny ideas and answers, what can be an alternative usage of those locations. He did also a number of works that are referring to other phenomena of socialist modernism, like Zagreb Fair and also various monuments. And what is always interesting that he claims that his works are not actually dealing with socialist modernism, that they are not dealing with utopia per se. He claims that his works rather initiated this process of questioning the problematic status of it. And in one of his recent interviews, he said, exotization can only happen when your history is in undecided status. So it was, of course, with this interest in Croatian modernism inevitable that sometimes those exoticizing readings of it happen. And where are we now? So that's the question. When Yugoslav modernism seems to be, to a certain point, researched and canonized, it was falling in and out of fashion in the last 10 years, just to be replaced by other points of international attention. So we can say that although a lot was done in the last 10 years about adding to knowing it better and researching it also from more scientific perspective, that basically, especially in local context, this heritage still kind of floats in this undecided state as a no man's land and everyone's land that is still open to different appropriations, conflicts, old and new social rituals. Here you can see what happened to Bakic's monument on Dotrščina in Zagreb that was recently defaced by fascist and Ustaša insignia. And in that sense, we can say that in the local context, these debates about the history had a very clear agenda to equal communism with totalitarianism, or as they call it today, red fascism. And now I will read a short quote by Boris Buden that captures this still problematic attitude toward the past. And Boris Buden wrote it in his text called Introduction into the Past, referring to the practice of Serbian film director Želimir Žilnik. This is what is new, the past as omnipresence, now here in everything, for everyone. The past is more current than the present and more uncertain than the future. The past that everyone is invited to judge in their own way, to recall, understand and recreate. The past that is not longer even dimension of the time, but on the contrary, a cultural artifact. And I'd like to conclude now with another series of works by David Maljković called Retired Form. It's a very ironic title that also links toward the further investigation of what is happening with the form when it is devoid of its purpose. So the form, as people, can also get retired. And if we have time, I'd like to... little time? Okay, maybe then I can use it as a background for our discussion. I will play David's film Retired Form. Here we come. So it uses the setting of the monument in Dotrščina, and he worked with extras, local people of elderly generation. So these are retired people, basically. And the film was filmed during the high noon, and the idea was to use this reflexive form to produce a further reflection. So in that sense, this work function as a telling metaphor of the status of the heritage in socialist modernism, in a way that those monuments, being emptied of their original meanings, are also staring back to us, and they are blinding us, both as individuals and as a society. And in that sense, we can say that Maljković's works are continuously calling for more engaged act of seeing, but also that they call in for progressive political imagination to re-inhabit those forms again. In many of his works, he used this encounter between a group of people, and they can represent society and such, and the object, either a monument or artistic work. And there is always a very tense situation between people who are observing and the heritage that looks back at them. So I'm concluding now, and we can use it as a background for maybe asking a few questions or asking for more clarification if something was unclear in my presentation. No.
Si hi ha qüestions que vulgueu comentar l'Anna, ara és l'ocasió.
Thank you.
Well, in English it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, well, I would like to come back to this morning thing we were talking about. So coming back to the topic of the socialist monuments, as far as I know, they're not just in Croatia, but scattered all across the former Yugoslavia territory, and not just made by these specific artists, but some other artists, architects, urbanists, etc. And some of them are still standing, right? So I'm just very much curious about what's the position of the art professionals regarding this, and also the states, you know, because from my point of view, it's very difficult to see all this production as a whole, because they are in Slovenia, in Zagreb, in Croatia, in Serbia, and so on. So I guess that the different states should be carrying out some joint initiatives also to I don't know, do some research and really to, I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I understand what you ask. So, how to describe the current situation? I think it was really well researched in the past few years. What is maybe still missing is this kind of, I'd say, more politicized reading of it, in a sense that is not exclusively approaching those phenomena from the aesthetic point of view, but that also combines like concrete research and different dimensions of those accomplishments. And apart from that, I think that's basically very positive. That's basically very positive. Apart from that, there is also a sense of exhaustion, and it was related, I'd say, to a growing international attention to those phenomena. In a way, it was very difficult to escape, especially in the case of the monuments that are we need to admit, fascinating. It was very difficult to escape this not only exoticization, but also the way that we romanticize them as ruins of our age. So I think maybe as a point of departure for future investigation would be really a sober analysis of what was done and what are the lessons we can, if we can, use and rework today. Because it's a question whether those lessons are still valid, because now we live in another society. So I think maybe the other way of looking at the heritage would be also to see what we are lacking today as a society, and maybe to try to influence it within our, own practices in a way that we should insist on certain things as, public education, art and culture being accessible for majority of people, not for just a few who can afford it, etc. Because I think these lessons from the past are very important. That art and culture had this democratic dimension, and that many independent positions, especially in the 70s, coming from the smaller galleries and artistic positions, they made experiments that were not in the society. They took the ideas that were in the official ideology and brought them on another level in the field of artistic practice. And today this is very difficult because of many restrictions, because of also many contradictions that we are inevitably falling into. And there is always this moment of what is not intended. So you are trying to approach and to accomplish all of this, and inevitably you are also doing lots of wrongdoings, no matter of your good intention.
Yes, Viviana?
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. Just a brief answer to if I understood your first question correctly, that the monuments are scattered and quite different, considering that they are the different parts of Yugoslavia. I would not agree with that. I think it's one quite homogeneous corpus that was based on the very precisely defined roles of the local communities, of the state, and different voluntary organizations that were existing within Yugoslavia. So it is, from my point of view, if you are approaching the story of monuments, you have to have information about the structure that was behind it, and of course the objectives, why the monuments were erased. Because these are not only anti-fascist monuments; these are also the monuments to the work, to the history of the working movement. And at the end, in 80s, the monuments that were raised is in honor of idea of socialism as such. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is that there are no laws that are protecting that kind of heritage, and the quite negative result of that very, very intense interest in socialist monuments in Yugoslavia, I'm afraid it could happen that there would be made a selection of the monuments that will be protected, which means that in this very, very tense situation when we have post-fascist regime in Croatia, it would be interpreted as a signal to destroy everything else. And it's really, really, really bad. The other thing which is not taken into account when talking about these monuments, 2,678 were destroyed, actually, from 1990 since now, and the number is rising because I expect another group of monuments to be destroyed in this near future. So a lot of these monuments are actually raised by the local communities who didn't lose their need to commemorate and to remember the members of their communities that were participating in the anti-fascist resistance. So they are still taking care about such kind of monuments, but due to the political moves, for example, the Petrova Gora is the best example, I just say that, there were some political moves to fragment the territorial the power to decide about what's happening in a certain territory was fragmented. For example, this monument at Petrova Gora. So you have 3 councils that have to decide what will happen with the monument, and they will never come to the agreement. And this is like kind of justification why nothing is happening. Sorry for this intervention.
I want to thank you for such a generous presentation and really brilliant. Thanks very much. And I want to really bring the attention to our own situation here in Spain, also regarding the past. But in our case, I mean, the objects we look at are obviously guilty monuments from Franco times and from a fascist period. But then the actual official politics towards those monuments, it's one of complete erasure, complete oblivion, and thus it is, they are all kind of, removed from public space and also from public visibility, which makes me think that this is kind of an added violence to the violence that originally constituted those monuments. And I think that we are really losing the opportunity to come to terms with the past and to experience a sort of collective pedagogy like the one you so beautifully presented to us today. So how would you feel, if your past was populated by these kind of guilty objects, fascist monuments? I mean, would you think that your strategies would be equally legitimate?
So your question is how would we relate our practice if the heritage from the past was imbued by radically different political ideas? Well, it's a tough question. Of course, I think the strategy would be different, because maybe another way to approach them would be not to investigate what happened with the physical object, but what is happening with the discourse. What are the other lingering forms of the past that are still haunting a certain society? And another thing is, I'd say, what is that either the removal or the musealization of this heritage is still trying to hide? What is this level? Because this often kind of goes unnoticed. And in that sense, I'd say that for sure this identification, this say ideological and political identification with your own past would not be of such strong fascination, inspiration, but I think the task of art production and curatorial and culture production would be to integrate it and to face it. What part of us is still there? Can it be related, for example, in Spanish context, also to another problem, a huge heritage and weight from the past of colonial hegemony, and to see how those ghosts of the past are resurrecting today? Because there is this book by Domenico Lo Surdo that questions historical revisionism in various cultural and political situations. And what is interesting when you read the book, when you approach the notion of historical revisionism from your own history, from your own perspective, you always think, okay, this is because we are like that. This is because we need to chew this same gum for another 20 years. But no, in other societies, it's always about a certain legitimization, and it goes back to the French Revolution and etc. So in that sense, I think still it would be a challenge how to deal with this past, and maybe sometimes official artistic production is not appropriate field of research. Maybe to be able to have an idea of it, one would need to go in a different, little corners, either in a film, literature production, or some very obscure practices, to see, okay, if there is something maybe progressive I can claim even from that time.
If I may say something, I would just conclude that, a complete erasure or demolition of those objects is no good solution, and the law is neither nor sufficient to cope with that complexity. So we really need to be able to have those objects around, yet sign them and mark them as guilty objects, but yet, we really need to engage in a pedagogy, in a public pedagogy with that past. Otherwise, it is just a ghost, and it's the easiest form to manipulate.
Exactly, and in the last years, I think we can also observe those objects, these basically unalive forms, from the perspective of so-called forensic analysis, or from this speculative point of view, like to view them as both being alive and dead. And it's also interesting to see what is this force that constantly fuels life in those basically dead objects. Thank you.
Well, there is something I really liked. Maybe it's more a comment than a question. It's your reading of the didactic exhibition as a pre-conceptual practice, somehow based on text and abstraction. Somehow it is true that after conceptual art, well, these are practices we've seen very often, document-based exhibitions, but in Barbara's presentation we could also see, also in your exhibitions you've organized in WHW, the combination between abstract forms and this use of the document not only as a contextualization but also as a problematization device. It's an element which is very much present, and I was interested in how both forms, abstraction and documentation, are also synthesized in this didactic exhibition from the 50s, which could be considered as a forerunner of the conceptual practices.
Yes, I agree. At the moment, I don't have much to add to this observation, because it's correct, but maybe also to justify it from the very logical point of view. The usage of that form in the case of didactic exhibition in 57 was also caused by the very fact that it was traveling exhibition. So it was very practical, like you can pack it in one suitcase and it can travel. And in our experience, this practicality was related to the fact that it was not possible to access the originals, and this sort of juggling documents and doing this and that at that time was also choice, but also necessity. Yeah.
I know everybody wants to have a coffee now, but well, I was asking whether you could be at the round table, thinking about asking you afterwards, but I could like to ask you whether you could talk a bit more in depth. Well, you have already talked about it, but maybe if you could talk a bit further. You've insisted several times on the word sober, sober analysis, as if it was the key for reading this past. And moreover, afterwards you finish with this beautiful quote from Boris Burden from the book Introduction to the Past, where he makes it clear that history is a cultural construction, and he talks about this idea about the past being more present than the present, or something which is more interesting than the present and even more uncertain than the future. So it's something which is going through us all the time. So my question could be, taking this into account that it is a construction, this idea of being sober you have insisted on, how do you do it? If you could say a bit more, or maybe you could say another synonym, something like that.
Okay, what I meant by using the term sober, it had to do with this false polarization that is constantly perpetuating. So on one hand, there is this fascination with the project of Yugoslavia, almost on the verge of this nostalgic approach. And as theorist Svetlana Boym said once, nostalgia is a history without guilt. So in that sense, the thing is that the sober analysis, or more honest or objective or scientific analysis or theoretic analysis, would also include failures, mistakes, limitations, wrongdoings, and that those historical facts can be and should be approached as historical facts that are not used as a leverage to undermine the tremendous contribution that the project of socialist Yugoslavia did in the field of various, experiences with socialist societies, socialist communities. And it had to do, we mentioned today many examples in the field of economy. It can be also mentioned this idea of self-management that was, also highly contesting and problematic, but still I think that there are many achievements that stand as really valuable experiences and valuable assets that we need to reclaim. Like, we can say we had that. It was not that we never had it. So in that sense, sober analysis means that we should acknowledge all facets, both positive and negative, to be able to translate maybe some of those experiences in organized political forms. And this is something what is still missing in Croatia, that is still missing, we can say, in former Yugoslavia, even in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Poland, in Croatia, we have this resurrection of far right. Yet there are many constituencies, many protagonists also coming from the cultural field who did a lot about who did a lot about this stand against neoliberalization and consequently this also post-fascist ideology. And in that sense we can be optimistic and hope that some of these experiences can be translated into more organized political forms, as we can see in some other European countries, in Spain, for example, in Greece, and see how perhaps some of those concepts from the past can be maybe not reevaluated, but taken from scratch. Like when you watch the examples of workers reclaiming factories in Argentina, for example, that's self-management, and also in some rare cases in Croatia. So in that sense, it can be also a sort of a beacon that can lead us in some future struggles. Thank you.